So we're talking about teratogens, and in the last video we ended where we were talking about we were left with two different kinds of teratogens. The first of these are environmental pollutants and infectious diseases. Now, there can be so many different kinds of environmental pollutants, right? But we consider the effects of two environmental pollutants, which are basically mercury and lead. Exposure to lead, and that too in high quantities. So, in Japan, for example, there was a particular water plant that was where there was a mercury leakage. And what you find is that women who were pregnant around the time gave birth to children who had, a lot of uncoordinated limb movements. So there was some sort of problem with limb coordination, right? They also had problems with speech. So they had linguistic problems coupled with that. You also have, physical deformities and mental retardation. Because again, mercury is something that attacks the brain, and therefore pregnant women are best advised to avoid fish of a certain kind. Fish such as swordfish, tuna, all of these might be heavily contaminated with mercury, and that's a substance that you can see if you're exposed to it prenatally. That can cause widespread damage to different areas of your body and your brain. Then next we talk about lead. So when we look at the effect of lead, so exposure to lead can happen in the form of exposure to something like paint, right? If you have paint flaking off walls in old buildings, for example, that can be a case where pregnant women may be exposed to lead, right? And exposure to lead can again lead to a wide variety of deformities. And these include something like, again, you have low birth weight, damage to the brain, and a variety of different physical deformities as well. But one thing that you should keep in mind whenever we're talking about teratogens is that, researchers have never been able to sort of isolate the effect of one teratogen, because obviously with pregnant women, you cannot really control for all other different factors. So basically, it's always almost, a combination of a lot of different factors coming together to cause the kind of harm that we're talking about, right? So, when we talked about how there are a number of factors which mediate the amount of harm that a particular teratogen will inflict, you have to think about, the third factor that we talked about, which was the presence of other negative influences, right? Now, next, what we talk about is infectious disease. And this might be very pertinent to us because we're a developing nation and we're still battling with a lot of different infectious diseases that certain countries which are part of the developing world are no longer so concerned with. So let me show you this chart. Now, here you have a list of different kinds of infectious diseases, right? If women are exposed to these during pregnancy, what you see is that you have the effects here. So if you have something like AIDS, right, and the woman is exposed to something like AIDS, there are high chances that the baby inside her will also acquire the disease or the viral infection that she's carrying, right? But basically, one of the other effects that might be there might be physical malformations. There is documented proof or scientific evidence that points towards the presence of mental retardation if the mother has AIDS, right? Sorry for that. There might be low birth weight and prematurity. With something like chickenpox, right? If we consider that, there is proof that there will be physical deformities, there will be mental retardation, and there will be low birth weight and prematurity, right? Now, when we consider something like herpes, right, that again is something that is extremely dangerous because you have the chances of miscarriage, you have physical malformations, you have mental retardation, and you have low birth weight and prematurity, right? With mumps, you have a greater chance of miscarriage. You don't have a lot of documented, evidence on physical malformations, and usually there is no sort of chance of mental retardation or low birth weight and prematurity. When we talk about rubella, which is a kind of German measles, then again that can prove to be very, very dangerous during the prenatal period because again you have a chance of miscarriage, physical malformations, mental retardation, and low birth weight and prematurity. So basically, with the question mark stands for that, there are possible effects, but they're not clearly established through research. Whereas the zero stands for that you have no evidence to suggest that there is chances of miscarriage. For example, if the mother has acquired immune deficiency syndrome, right? Now, there might be some bacterial infections as well. So, for example, if you have tuberculosis, there is a higher chance of miscarriage. If you have something like syphilis, there's again a high chance of miscarriage, a high chance of physical malformations, mental retardation, and you might have chances of low birth weight and prematurity as well. If you have something like malaria, right? Again, your chance of miscarriage and low birth weight and prematurity increase. If you have toxoplasmosis, which is an infection that is carried through basically cats, so and their feces, so pregnant women are advised to not stay in contact with cat's feces, right? And basically, if you have a cat, it's best that you make someone else responsible for changing the cat's litter while you're pregnant. So there's again, high chance of miscarriage, high chance of physical malformations, high chance of mental retardation, and low birth weight and prematurity. However, the good thing is that there are vaccines available for most of these diseases, and pregnant women usually are safe from these diseases because of the vaccinations that they're administered before they get pregnant, right? So that's another point that is important. That it's important to get vaccinated against all of these different kinds of infectious diseases, right? Next, we consider a host of other maternal factors that also influence the developing organism, and these are equally important than what we have discussed. So, other than teratogens, these are other factors that may have an impact on, or they do have a significant impact on the development of the growing organism, the growing baby, right? So, the first of these is nutrition. And what you see is that if the mother does not have adequate nutrition, that can cause severe damage to the central nervous system of the child, right? Because brain weight does not increase as it should, right? And because of that, the brain does not grow, and this can result in a host of other problems that develop later on in life. Obviously, you will have some form of intellectual disability when you have damage to the central nervous system and when you have this restrictive growth of the brain, right? Then you might have damage to other organs as well if the mother is very, very malnourished, right? And therefore, it is very, very important for the mother to have adequate nutrition. Right. Then you have something like maternal stress, right? Now, stress again is something because what you see is that stress hormones can cross the placenta and travel to the developing baby. And one of the things that you see is that stress sometimes may have more effect on the child than something like, tobacco may, or some other teratogens that we've discussed, right? Stress can have an even more adverse effect than some of the teratogens that we've discussed. Now, how does stress affect the child? One of the things is that you might have a child on your hands that later has a lot of anger and aggression issues, right? And even after some time of being born, when researchers check for cortisol levels, which is basically a hormone that allows us to regulate our stress, right? What you see is that cortisol levels of babies who had mothers who were extremely stressed, right, are abnormally low, which shows that they're not very well prepared to be able to handle any kind of stress, right? Then you also have other factors such as maternal age. Right now, it's very commonly believed that women in their 30s experience problems conceiving or problems having healthy babies. Now, research does not really back this. Research shows that you have an equal chance of having a baby and getting pregnant and giving birth to a healthy baby in your 30s as much as you do in your 20s. After this time, having a baby who might have some kind of birth defects increases dramatically. So one of the things that we see is something like Down syndrome. This is something we've talked about earlier. The chances of Down syndrome increase with maternal age, right? Other factors also do, such as miscarriages, such as again low birth weight. All of these different host of factors increase as a mother's age increases. That's another factor. Then you have another factor which is called RH incompatibility. So what does that mean? That basically means that if the mother lacks the RH protein in her blood, which basically makes her negative, have a negative blood type, but the baby is Rh positive, right? Then some of that blood, the baby's blood, can cross over to the mother's. And the mother's blood, then what it does is that it starts attacking the baby, the growing baby inside of her. So that can be a possible risk factor in women who are Rh negative. This means is that if the mother has a negative blood type, but the baby has a positive blood type, that can cause an issue because the mother's body reacts to the positive blood type if some of it travels to the mother's body, like, if it crosses the placenta and if the mother's body detects it, right? What that does is then that can start creating antibodies against the baby because it sees the baby as an intruder and it starts attacking it. But this is usually the case in second to third pregnancies and not usually an issue in the first pregnancy, even though a mother is given certain drugs that basically stop these antibodies from forming, and therefore chances of any problem happening because of Rh incompatibility are reduced. So yes, these basically are the host of other maternal factors that we were supposed to talk about, and this is it.